friends of YouTube, Derek Van Diest here with Zaandam Music. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how I made the beat Eunoia. So let's hop right into it. So if you guys haven't heard the beat already, it's on my YouTube channel. Just search up Eunoia and check it out, and then come back to this video. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how I made that beat. So starting off, I'm going to show you all the instruments that I used. So with the bass sounds, I used an 808, and I'll show you which one I used here. I had an instance of Maschine opened up, and I put in Contact. And then I used the Trap Sinatra kit. Let's see here. The Beat House Kids Trap Sinatra, and I used 808 Cooking Up. Alright, and I'll show you here what I did. It's only on the hook section. I programmed the pattern in using the pattern mode. And then I bounced it to a WAV file. And this is what the 808 sounds like. Alright, and that's with mixing already done. So the other bass sound that I used is a Sapphire sub. And the reason that I called it Sapphire sub is because this is from a sample pack. So I'll show you guys what sample pack I used for this beat and the other samples that I have in this beat as well. So here's what the Sapphire sub sounds like. And it's also playing at the same time as the 808. Alright, and those are the two bass sounds that I used for this project. Now coming up to the drums, I used a kick, and I used a sample one with one of my sample packs. It's called the Go-To Kick. I then bounced it to a WAV file, and this is what the kick sounds like. And I also have two patterns of that kick. Here's the second pattern. Okay, and up next I have a clap sound, and I did the same thing. I used an instance of sample one with a Lil Skies clap. This is what the clap sounds, like once it's been bounced. Okay, and then I also used a different clap here for the verse section, and I'll show you what that sounds like. This one's actually from a sample. So I got the sample from a sample pack for this one. A sample loop is what I mean. Like I just dragged the loop onto the project. That's why I don't have an instrument attached to it. But up next I have the snare. And I did the same thing, sample one with a snare one from a sample folder. And I programmed that in MIDI here. And then I bounced it to WAV, and I'll show you what the snare sounds like. Okay, and up next we have a hi-hat. And I used another sample one with hi-hats 10 from a sample folder. And this is what the hi-hats sound like. I also programmed them through MIDI. Whoops. And here's what it sounds like when I bounced it to WAV. Okay, I also have another hi-hat, and this hi-hat was a loop, sample loop as well. I just clicked and dragged it into the project. This is what it sounds like. Whoops, it's over here. And that's just to switch it up for the verse, and I'll explain that later on. Next, I used an open hat, and I did the same thing, sample one with an open hat 2. And the open hat, I then bounced it after MIDI, I bounced it to WAV, and this is what it sounds like. This is what it sounds like with the hi-hat. Okay. Whoops. Okay, now, and last I used the perk. Another sample one with a perk sound, and then bounced it to WAV. This is what the perk sounds like. And this is like one of my favorite perk sounds now. It's amazing. So let me show you what all the drums sound like together. And now with the bass sounds. Okay, so let's move on to the instruments now. For the instruments, this is where I use some samples from a sample pack. So I'm going to show you what I did here. It's called Sapphire. So one of my sample packs from MJ Nichols from Wave Supply, I used the Sapphire stems folder, which has the 4 wave files used to create this sample. So this is the original sample here. Okay, so that's the one I used, but I didn't use that one. I used the 4 stems. And let me show you what I did. So let's go back. So the Sapphire ARP, this is one of the stems. The Sapphire ARP is already a wave file. I don't have to do much to it. But what I did to it is I transposed it down 1, and then I tuned it up 1. So it sounds a little different than the original sample that you heard. It sounds a little darker. So that's what I did to all of them, actually. The Sapphire Bell also transposed, because you want all of them to be in the same key. So after I transposed that, it sounds different now. So let's solo what the Sapphire ARP sounds like. Okay, it also sounds different because I did some mixing to it, so I'll show you that later on. Let me show you what the Sapphire Bell sounds like now. And here are the 2 instruments together. Alright, so let's move on to the pads now. For the pads, I used a Sapphire string, so this is the 3rd one. So it's ARP, bell, strings, and the sub. So I used all of them there, and I transposed them all the same. Here's what the string sounds like. One thing I just remembered, I also time stretched these. So as you can see, it was like 142. I time stretched it to 140, so it's a little slower. So those are the strings I used. Now for the second set of strings, I felt like it needed something different for the verse. So I put in an instance of Omnisphere, and I'm using this Mega Pad sound. And this is from the Pads and Strings library, category, I mean. So this is what the Omnisphere pad sounds like. After I programmed it in MIDI, I bounced it, and let's play it here. And there's 2 different patterns for that. Let's play it with the other pad sounds. And let's play it with the instruments. And let's play it with the bass. And let's add the drums real quick. Alright, cool. So let's finish off here with the effects. We have the riser. I used the riser effect here. It's the metal to noise sweep. And I used that one. I bounced it to wave, so I used it right here. So let's hear what it sounds like. So it's really unique. It's kind of like spacey, I think. I used it several times. I used it before the hook, before the verse, before the hook. Pretty much before each section. And then I used another riser on this project. I used a windy atonal pitch rise. And I bounced it to wave, and I used it in the middle of the verse section. Because I was experimenting with it, and it sounded pretty cool. So I decided to keep it. So let's hear what that sounds like in context. So I decided to keep that. I like the way that sounds. So after that, I put in my standard beat tag, the one I always use, bounced it to wave from an instance of sample 1, And here's the beat tag real quick.
Zaandam music.
And it only plays one time. Alright, so those are all the instruments that I used. And I did some automation as well, which I'll show you guys at the end. But let me do the arrangement really fast and show you guys what I did. As you can see up here, let me make it smaller. I started with an intro. I have 3 hooks and 2 verse sections, as well as an outro. The whole beat is 3 minutes and about 40 seconds. And it's in C# minor, and the tempo is 140. So for the intro, I started building up the energy with the subs here. I started with the subs, the ARP sound, and the strings. For the second half of the intro, I added the bells, so it wouldn't get too boring. You know, too long here for this section. The whole intro is 27 seconds. So if I didn't add the bells already, people would just get bored. And the riser transitions to the hook, so I wanted all the energy in the hook. All the drum sounds are playing in the hook. And the 808 jumped in there. Let's see. And I'm going to explain this later on. I did something cool here. So hopefully I'll remember at the end. Anyways, so the hooks are all the same. All 3 hooks are exactly the same, as you can see here. I'm hoping that the rapper, when they choose to work on this project, they mix it up in the hooks just so it sounds a little different. The verse sounds as well. The 2 verses are pretty much the same. There's not much different in it. For the verse, I dropped all the sounds, all the drum sounds, the 808, and I just went right back to the Sapphire bass and the pads. So I started with just the bass and the pads and started building it up by adding ARP and then some drum sounds and building it right back up to the hook and doing the same thing all the way throughout. Now for the outro, I decided to end it with just the Sapphire bass and the strings playing with a second pattern to make it unique. It's a higher pattern, higher registers, so you're going up towards the end instead of down like I was in the verse. Yeah, and that's pretty much it there for the arrangement. So let's go ahead and get into the mix section now. So here's the mixer, and I'm just going to make it a little bigger so we can see it easier. I'm going to start off with the bass sounds. So for the bass, I have the 808 instrument here, which I bounced to a WAV file. So after I bounced it to a WAV file, I started doing the edits. I have it on the bass bus channel. As you guys can see, these are the bus channels that all the mix instruments are on. So the bass sounds are routed to bass, drums are routed to drums. Down here, bass is routed to the bass VCA, and these are routed to the drum VCA. So VCA is basically the very end here, these green channels. I can adjust the volumes for all those indicated channels. So back to what I was saying, the 808 here. First thing I did was add a fab filter. And this is what I did to cut off some of the very low end and some of the top end as well, and boost it in the right area. I always put the FabFilter Pro at the bottom. Every time I do low cut, I always put it at the very bottom. So FabFilter, as you can see, is always going to be there at the bottom. Alright, the next thing I did, let's see if I can remember, I sidechained. But I'll talk about the sidechain later, so just keep that in mind. So the next step was sidechaining. After I sidechained, I did Decapitator. And I like to use Decapitator on all my projects. This is like my distortion. All I did was increase the drive, mess around with the tone, and I got it at the right level. So the last thing I did to this was the Ozonate Imager just to remove all of the stereo width. So I brought all the bands down just to make it fully mono. This compressor here is what I did with the sidechain. I can talk about it now. So the sidechain, I brought it to this amount, and I think I put it on auto. Yeah, I did. I put it on auto because I like the way it sounds. So it just took the kick sound and the 808 sound and matched it together for the proper sidechain. And I adjusted it here. As you can see, here are the sends to the sidechain. I have a sidechain to the 808 and a sidechain to the sub, to the Sapphire sub. So for the Sapphire sub now, I used a FabFilter Pro Q, took down some of the low end, some of the high end. This is what I did to it. I then did the compressor for the sidechain like I did with the 808. And, oh yeah, I showed you that. Then I also did the exact same Ozone 8 imaging to make it fully mono for the bass sounds. So that's it for bass. Let's move on to the kick now for the drum sounds. For the kick, I started off with the FabFilter Pro Q. This is what I did. Then I added a sausage fattener because I felt like it needed more fatness and more color. So that's what I did to it there. 18% and 10%. Sidechain here, as I showed you earlier. Let's move on to the next sound now. For the clap, I used a standard low cut fab filter. So this is what I did for most of my drum sounds, just cutting out the low end that we don't need to remove that muddiness in the mix. So that's all I did for the clap sound. The other clap sound, I did pretty much the same thing, low end cut. And that's all I did for the clap sounds, guys. I really like the samples that I used. I think they sound good on their own, and they really don't need that much tweaking. So for the snare, I did another low cut to get rid of the low end for the muddiness. Snare, I panned it to the left about 24. And let's move on to the hi-hat. The hi-hat, I panned to the right 21. And I used a fab filter, low cut. And let's move on to the other hi-hat, the Key West hi-hat. This one, I did the same thing. I did another low cut for the hi-hat. Took out all that low end. And this one's also panned to the right 18. So the open hat, I bounced it to a wave. So for the beginners out there, if you can see there are some empty channels. The empty channels are the instruments. You can see that with the icon here. Those are instrument icons. And these are the wave icons. So I like to program everything, all the patterns using the instrument, and then bouncing it to a wave, and then doing all the effects on the wave. And this is good for many reasons. And one of the best reasons is when you go to export your project, all the stem files, you want the mix effects to be saved on the wave file, exported with the wave file. So you guys can look up more tutorials on that on YouTube. There's plenty out there. So back to the project. I panned the open hat left 21. And let's move on to the last sound. Here's the perk sound. I added another fab filter, low cut, to remove the low end. And I panned it to the left 24. So that's all the drum sounds. For the instruments now, for the ARP, I started with the fab filter, and this is what I did. I had to do a little more to it. I found the right frequency, and I decided to raise it up and make it more prominent. I took out the high end, I took out the low end. And after that, I mean, I really didn't do much to it. It sounded pretty nice to me right from the get-go. I believe the next thing I did was add this Echo Boy. And I'm going to show you the Echo Boy real quick right now. So if I move on to my FX channels, which are indicated in blue here, the turquoise blue are my reverbs, and the more like baby blue, navy blue kind of, are my actual FX. So for the Echo Boy, I used the preset ambient echoes, and I tweaked it up on the feedback, I believe, and the output. And yeah, I got it to the way that I wanted it to sound good for many instruments. As you can see here, I used the Echo Boy for both of my instruments and both of my pads. So I had to sound good for all of them. Alright, so after the Echo Boy was added, I finished it off with an Ozone 8 imager. And I used the control mid-range preset because I wanted to control the mid-range, obviously, as you saw with the Fab Filter Q. And then all I did was click Learn. It's that simple, and Learn will automatically adjust the bands to fit the whole beat. So that's one reason why Ozone Advanced is just such a great program, guys. So yeah, I did that for the Sapphire Bell, so let's move on to the Sapphire Bell now. I also did the same Ozone 8 imaging, but this time I used the Spacious High End preset, and I click Learn again. Now for the Fab Filter Pro, all I did was a low cut for this one to get rid of some of the muddiness. I used the same Echo Boy with a different level, a different amount here, as you can see. Whoops, this one here. Wait, did I click the right one? Yeah, okay. And no panning for these instruments. Now let's move on to the pad sounds. For the pad sounds, I used a FabFilter Pro Q, and this is what I did to the pad. And then I added an Ozone 8 imager. So for the imaging, I remember what I did for this project. I basically did the imaging last. So all this ozone imaging was the very last step in the project for me, for all the instruments. I used the Enhance Space preset, click to learn, and put in Echo Boy and Pan Man. So Pan Man is being used for my pad sounds. So let me show you the Pan Man. If we scroll back over here, I'm going to double click Pan Man. And here it is right here. Wider and wider. So I have it just tickling your left and right here just a little bit. Not too much. Just the right rate for the tempo of this beat. So it took me actually quite a while to get that right for the pads. Back to the pad sounds. No panning on the pad sounds. I showed you the imaging, I believe. One more time here. Enhance Space. And now for the second pad sound, I used another ozone imager. I used Enhance Space just like the last one, and I click Learn. And I also used a FabFilter Pro Q, and to get rid of all that low end, and to give it some more air here in this area. And that's it for all of that. So let's move on to the effects. As you can see, for the effects, I didn't do anything. Nothing at all. I didn't even put the auto-tune on the beat tag. And the reason is because the beat tag's already in C, in the key of C, and the beat's in C sharp. Wait, C sharp? Okay, I'm gonna double check that, but that's weird. I thought it was in C. Okay, anyway, so I didn't do anything for the effects. And these should be on the VCA channels, but I rarely use the VCA channels. I only use it when I'm working with another producer and it's a bigger project and it involves more sounds. But anyways, back to the project here. I'm doing the reverbs next. So I use all the same reverbs for all my projects, starting with the plate reverb. This is for the drum sounds. I use the plate reverb for all the drum sounds. I'm using the drum plate preset. Now for the hall reverb, which I use for the pad sounds, I'm using a Valhalla Vintage Verb, very nice hall setting. And on top of that, I put a FabFilter Pro Q to get rid of some of the low end for the reverb, just to remove some more muddiness. Now for the room reverb, I use my favorite Altiverb 7, and I always use the SARM West Studios, just to emulate as if I was producing in this studio, as if all the instruments were playing in this area. So the room reverb is on all the sounds. And I put a FabFilter Pro Q to remove some of the muddiness. And I showed you the Pan Man and the Echo Boy, so let's move on to the bus channels here in red. So for the bus channels, I don't have anything on the bus channels. Nothing. All I have are the sends for the reverb. So a little bit of room reverb here for the bass. I don't like to add too much reverb. For the drum, I'm using a bit of room and a bit of plate, kind of like an even amount. Now for the instrument, I'm using a little more room reverb and just the room. And for the pads, I'm using even more room and quite a bit of hall reverb as well. And for the effects, I'm using the same amount of room reverb as the instrument. And I do that for most of my projects. If you guys have seen my other videos, they're pretty much the same for all of them. Now here is my automation section, but I don't have anything on here because I did a different type of automation. But usually for the filter, I would have a filter here, but nothing's on there for this project. Filter bypass, nothing needs to be bypassed for this. And the mix bus is reserved for my mastering, but I did the mastering on a different program. I used Ozone 8 Isotope Advanced, so I used it on a different, like outside of this project. Now for the master, I'll show you here what I did. I do this for all my projects. Ozone 8. I did a high pass and a low pass. I mean, two brick wall high passes. Hold on. Okay, one brick wall high pass and one brick wall low pass here, because we don't need the frequencies above this range or below this range. So I just removed it. Now, I use Hornet Song Key on my master just to see what key the beat is in, and I guess it is in C sharp minor. For some reason, I thought it was in C. I don't know why, but it is in C sharp minor. And then I have Sample Grabber, which is for a different program. for the flux analyzer. So that's it for all the mixing, and I'm gonna cap this off now with the automation that I did. So for the automation, you want to hit the letter A if you're on Studio One, and that'll open up the automation area. I did one here for the volume, so I automated the volume. It basically starts at a normal range, and then it just drops here for the hook. I just dropped the volume, and that's really the only time that I messed around with the volume on this beat. As you can see, the line is just straight line, except this here where I did the curve. So let's hear what that sounds like in context. It's very subtle, guys. That's very quick. You gotta catch it quick. Like, it just drops right there because I did it for all of the sounds too. If you can see here, just a little bit here on the tail. I mean, I don't really want to get too into it because it's quite detailed. But the reason I did that, like, it just sounds better. Okay, let's just put it at that. It just sounds better transitioning to the hook. Let me show you a couple more times here what it sounds like. Let me show you what it sounds like without, so you can see the difference. See how it just continues on? It doesn't really like have a pause, but when I turn that on, it has a little pause. So yeah, I did that, and let's look at the other automation that I did. Okay, for the sub, and this is something I've never done before. This is my first project doing it. I have the sub band 1 frequency for automation for the FabFilter Pro Q. So what that means is, let me bring this down. If you look at the mix channel, if I go to the mixer here and I open up the FabFilter Pro Q for this Sapphire, I basically have this band right here on automation. It's going to open and close. And let me see if I can show you guys what I mean. So let's see if it does it in real time. I should actually, but watch how it rises. You're going to see this band here is going to change over time and then drop on the hook. So let's watch it rise from here in real time. Hold on. Let's get it so we can see it at the same time. Here we go. Okay, so that was awesome how it just moved like that. So that's just a basic automation. And the reason I did that was I wanted all of the low-end frequency for that sub in this area in the intro, because the 808s are not in the intro, so I wanted the full bass range in the intro. But then when the 808s come in, I need to make room for the 808 frequency. So that's why I cut the band down when the 808 comes in to give it room. So I thought that was awesome. I did that for the intro and the hook, as you can see here, and then it goes to the verse back full range since the 808s aren't there, all the way through. And I really like the way it turned out in the beat, because you can really hear it if you pay attention. You can hear the sub just dropping in frequency as it transitions to the hook. So let me show you what I mean here one more time so you can see. It's just awesome how that bass just drops right at the tail end here where it just disappears right before the hook. And I think that makes the hook a more powerful drop when it hits. Along with that riser, that helps it. And the beat tag also helps it as well. So anyways, that's the automation that I did for this beat. I hope you guys learned something today. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one. And take care, everyone.